623, 7 December 2020. This is number 3. This will likely rankle some more people. Good. This is from James Bennett, guest writer at Redoubt News. The Solzhenitsyn question. When should you resist? We must ask ourselves these questions and we must answer. As the battle to maintain our constitutional republic intensifies, a question keeps popping up in my mind and in the mind of many others that we must squarely resolve before moving forward. Some say that our attempts to reclaim and maintain our constitutional republic in the courts, through the legislature, by our relationships with education and at the ballot box may be in vain. Indeed, civic responsibility versus authority is not even correctly understood in modern discourse. They argue that we have, as many civilizations before us, set ourselves on the path of judgment and destruction, so why waste the energy? Others say the judgment has just started, and some say that it's already upon us, and that they may be right. And there are others, a happy, dedicated, weeping few who are still fighting strategically, even though the outcome looks grim. This has culminated in the great debate over how long Christians and patriots will allow these attempts to overthrow our constitutional republic will go unchecked. It has been happening for a while. They've started at the foundations, right at the education system. We seem to be stuck at one point asking over and over again, but never answering the Solzhenitsyn question, at what exact point then should we resist? Or perhaps it is better to ask two questions. At what point then should one resist within the existing system, and at what exact point then should one resist violently? The answer to the former question is already settled. I've heard too many times to recall the famous mantra, now is not the right time to fight this issue. However, it is the moral right and the duty of an individual to resist the unlawful and unjust policies of any governing body. So let's get to it right now. Unalienable rights may only be lost through death or acquiescence. The imposition of tyranny must be confronted at every step with all constitutionally available means, if for no other reason than to prevent violence. This is done by the governing or the governed. With the governed, resistance commonly takes the form through what is known in political science as Irish democracy, or the civic authority to just not comply with pretended legislation because it is against the laws of nature and nature's God. During Prohibition, this was especially pronounced and can be seen today in various non-compliance movements surrounding ranching. With the governing, typically resistance takes the form of nullification or non-recognition or non-enforcement. These doctrines are simply an extension of the requirements in the oath of office and the individual's moral duty to disobey an unlawful order. It's also based on the simple principle that in our dual sovereignty or dual federalism system, the federal governing officials cannot be the final arbiters of whether their own actions are or are not constitutional. In this respect, federal and state elected officials and county sheriffs are bound by Article 4 of the United States Constitution. In part it reads, the senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. That Constitution, not a liberal blasphemy of a Constitution. The original Constitution. The original. Consequently, Thomas Jefferson believed that by extension, the governing officials of the states had a natural right to nullify any laws they believed were unconstitutional. In the Kentucky Resolution of 1798, he wrote, "Co-states, recurring to their natural right, will concur in declaring these acts void and have no force, and will take measures of its own for providing that neither these acts nor any others of the general government not plainly and intentionally authorized by the Constitution shall be exercised within their respective territories." Alexander Hamilton echoed this in Federalist Paper number 85. "We may safely rely on the disposition of the state legislatures to erect barriers against the encroachments of the national authority." Non-enforcement occurs at the county level, or even the city level, again as an extension of upholding the oath of office. The county sheriff is the senior law enforcement officer, both in terms of rank and legal authority in a county. This comes from a tradition of over 1,000 years of Anglo-Saxon common law. Brief side note, I believe it's interesting and telling that liberals want to abrogate, destroy, nullify Western history, Western civilization, the very foundations of the country. And this is a bit of it. This comes from a tradition of over 1,000 years of Anglo-Saxon common law. Anglo-Saxon communities were typically organized into shires, consisting of approximately 1,000 people. The chief law enforcement officer of the shire was the reeve, or the reef. Hence, the modern combination of the two words as we know them today, shire, reef, or sheriff. Consequently, the sheriff's preeminent legal authority is well established. This was correctly confirmed in Prince versus the United States. The late Justice Scalia quotes James Madison, who wrote in Federalist 39, "In the latter, the local and municipal authorities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy, no more subject within their own respective spheres to the general authority than the general authority is subject to them within its own sphere. Furthermore, no one is above the law, including federal agents, including Antifa, mentioned in one statement. Federal agents will claim they have the authority, period. Antifa claims some moral authority. This begs two great questions. How will a law passed at the federal level be enforced locally? And if no one stops Antifa's rampages, who will? Consequently, the laws we have are only as good as those officers that enforce them at the local level. Thus, the rise of tyranny must first come through both the United States military and the county sheriff. And this can only happen if those same people violate their oaths to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution and their own state's constitution. Today, or at the date that this was written, today in Washington, with the passage of I-1639 and other attempts at legislating gun control, police chiefs and sheriffs are publicly stating their intent not to enforce these unconstitutional measures. Non-enforcement was previously successful during the attempt by federal authorities to confiscate the firearms of a veteran in Priest River, Idaho. That incident ended peacefully, unlike some others. Ruby Ridge, Lon Horiuchi, federal agent who shot a pregnant woman in the back, killing her. They shot the 14-year-old boy. Hell, they shot the dog. And Weaver was actually let off. Charges dropped later. Wonder where Horiuchi is today. However, what about when state and local elected officials are allowing Marxist insurgents to commit crimes seemingly without consequences? In other words, what about when laws are not enforced, which likewise brings about tyranny? When Antifa and other communist shock troops, Democrat shock troops, are rioting unchecked in our county, in our country, hell, our counties too, and threatening to move into rural areas, it is the second question of Solzhenitsyn which is so troubling to many, especially Christians. I don't have that problem. We must settle in our minds and our hearts right now the answer. I will settle in mine some time ago. When one's belt is taken away, when one is ordered to face the corner, when one crosses the threshold of one's home. An arrest is a series of incidental irrelevancies, of a multitude of things that do not matter. And there seems no point in arguing about one of them individually, especially at a time when the thoughts of the person arrested are wrapped tightly around the big question, what for? And yet, all these incidental irrelevancies taken together implacably constitute the arrest. He expounds on the idea further in a footnote. And how we burned in the camps later thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive or had to say goodbye to his family, or if people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and at every step on the staircase, but had understood they had nothing left to lose, and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, or whatever else was at hand. If we didn't love freedom enough, and then even more, we had no awareness of the real situation, we purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterward. He concludes powerfully by writing, resistance. Why didn't you resist? Those quotes came from Gulag Archipelago, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. They're relevant today. Today, those who have continued to live on in comfort scold those who suffered. Yes, resistance should have begun right there at the arrest itself, but it did not begin. The failure to answer the question correctly and then act accordingly led to the untold deaths of millions in the communist regimes around the world. Indeed, in such scenarios, I am in fact my brother's keeper. And so, most will find difficulty in this. Violent resistance begins when anyone comes up the stairs to unjustly arrest our neighbors, destroy their property, attempt to physically harm them. Yet there should not be difficulty at all in this, because our founding fathers justified the entire revolution based on this principle. Recall in April 19th of 1775, where the British, after receiving orders to seize the weapons of the Massachusetts militia and arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock, marched on Lexington and Concord. At Lexington Green, Captain John Parker issued the famous command to his Minutemen, "Stand your ground, Do not fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. The British fired the first shot of the Revolutionary War, and we promptly reacted almost 1 year prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. At what exact point then should we resist? We have a duty to stop evil in the spiritual as Christians, as he says. And likewise, we have a duty to stop evil when it manifests in the physical. Christianity proclaims in Romans 12:18, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. This implies that there is a point at which peace is impossible. At that point, we must be prepared to act quickly to defend our homes and our families from those who seek to do us physical harm, destroy everything we hold dear, and overthrow our constitutional republic. Let us give thanks. We have not had to do that yet. Sig 2-3 out.